Welcome back, Cat 5 class. We're going to do our first dimensioning video using AutoCAD. Okay, so this is problem 814. We're given an isometric view and we are to create a front, top, or front and side view, or a combination of all three, and correctly dimension it. All right, so let's take a look at the answer key. So here's the answer key for problem 814. Notice they only gave us a front view and a side view. If you want to create the top view, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so if you want to go front and top, or front and side, or all three views and dimension it, either one is acceptable. So depending on your supervisor, level of experience, or preference, two views may be enough for a simple part like this one. And if you throw in a third view, hey, should be okay if you go with three views. All right, so I'm providing you with the AutoCAD file. So let's take a look at the AutoCAD file. Okay, so here's the AutoCAD file incomplete. So we have the front view and the side view. And if you want to create a top view, you can always use your construction lines, right? You can project up from the side view and go across and so on, and then project upward from the front view. And that'll help you create a top view if you choose to create a top view. Okay, so for this assignment, two views is more than enough. If you go with the top view, hey, that also works. It's not necessary, but it's acceptable. All right, so let's go ahead and complete our views. So let's first go to our visible object layer. Whoa. I had the construction line selected, so let me hit escape on the keyboard, escape, upper left corner key, escape, and let me go over to the visible layer. All right, so by the way, you can also look at your eDrawings 3D model, right? Okay, so we have our front view, right? Typically your front view is the view with the most information. Okay, that'll be our front, and then we'll create our side view, right side view. Okay, so the front view appears to be complete. Let's take a look at the AutoCAD file. Yeah, so the front view is complete. Okay, let's go over to the side view. Okay, so front view is complete. Let's take a look at the right side view. Okay, so we're gonna draw this L shape. And on the opposite side, we have this edge that we cannot see. So we'll draw with the red hidden line. And this edge here is already covered by this object line, right? So this object line here will override this hidden line. So we don't even need to draw it. But we do have to draw this edge here where the chamfer ends, right? As a hidden dashed line on this right side view perspective. All right, so let's go ahead and draw this right side view using our construction lines. All right, and by the way, if you don't see your line thicknesses, your line weights, here's the icon, right? So this will allow you to turn your line weights on and off. If you don't see the line weight icon, you can always load it. Go to the last icon on the status bar, click on it, and there you have line weight. If you don't see the check mark, just click on line weight and it'll load the line weight icon into the status bar. All right, so let's continue with this problem. So we're going to draw the L shape, or the L shape facing in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's use the line command. Okay, so line command, I'll start at the bottom right corner. And I should turn on ortho so I can go horizontal and vertical, or limit myself to horizontal and vertical unless it tries to snap to something. Okay, and right click, enter, or you can hit escape or enter on the keyboard. Okay, so there's our side view. Now we need the red hidden line, right? So now we don't draw a red hidden line here because we have the solid visible object line in front that's overlapping and overwriting it. So for this case here, we don't have an object line, so we do need to draw that red hidden line to represent the one on the opposite side. Okay, so red hidden line for this edge here, end of this chamfer. All right, so let's go into the red hidden layer using line command. And again, we would have a red hidden line going across, but the wide visible object line here overwrites it, so we can just go ahead and shorten it. And there it is. Hit escape to deselect. All right, so we're done with our front and top and side view, excuse me. If you want to create a top view, go for it. It's optional. All right, so now let's go ahead and throw in some dimensions. Let's cheat and take a look at the answer key. Okay, so we need an overall length, right, of 4. We have a length of 3. So here we're choosing this as our datum, right? So this has more surface on this side than there is on this side. So we're going to use this as our datum and dimension right to left, right to left. Okay, so once again, this has more surface area on the right than we do on the left. Okay, so this will be our datum to dimension from. All right, so let's go back to AutoCAD. Let's go to the dimensions layer. Okay, so let's go to dimension. All right, so now we can stay here on the home tab and use the annotation panel here. So we have a little bit of annotations and dimensions. It's limited, but if you want the full-blown dimensioning and annotations panels, go to Annotate tab. You have a lot more options. Annotate. So you can see we have more options for dimensions and notes, for example. Okay, center marks, center lines, etc. And towards the end of the semester, we'll be inserting tables to list our parts that make up an assembly. All right, so let's go ahead and go to dimensioning. Now this is the dimension icon here is a quick way to dimension a part, but sometimes it doesn't dimension it correctly. You can dimension a circle, diameter, an arc, radius, horizontal, vertical. But instead of using this quick dimension, I'm going to do it the long way. I'm going to go with, I know I got to create linear dimensions. So this one will allow you to create horizontal or vertical linear dimensions. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the linear dimension. And we're going to dimension from this corner. So actually click on the actual corner. And I'm going to go to the first one and click. And there's our first dimension. Ta-da! Congratulations. Congratulations, you just created your first dimension. Okay, notice how it automatically puts a gap. Okay, so if you were to print this in black and white, we want to be able to distinguish an object line from an extension line, right? Extension line of a dimension. So this is the dimension line with the arrow. This is the extension line. It extends to the object line, but it does leave that little gap, right? And that's so that we don't mix it up with an object line in case you print this in black and white. All right, so now let's throw in another dimension. So the first dimension, by the way, you should go about 2 text heights. Okay, so the first dimension, you don't want it too close, so we can always use the grips. So just select the dimension and you can use the grips to move it around. So this is too close, obviously. You want to go, it's about 2 text heights right there, and go another one. And that's pretty good right there. Okay, so hit escape. You can just eyeball it. Okay, so the first dimension should be about 2 text heights away from the object lines. And then the second, third, and so on dimension can be about a text height and spacing between them. Okay, so let's throw in the second dimension. So let's go to linear again. So once again, this is our datum on the right. There's more surface area on the right than there is on the left. Okay, so we're dimensioning from right to left. And let's go to this corner here and click, and then move up and click to position it. And again, you need to know how to space it. You don't want it to look overcrowded, so we can go about a text height between them. Okay, and there it is. And text height is about, if you're following the standards, typically a text height, following the American standards, is about 0.16 inches or 0.18 inches in height. If you're using international standards, it's about 3 millimeters in height. And this should already be set up for you. If you go work for a company, they should already have a standard that they're following, whether it's an American standard using inches or using an ISO standard with millimeters. And once again, look at the gaps. Okay, let me show you something that is incorrect. You do not want an extension line. So right now we do have the gap at the bottom. You don't want an extension line overlapping an object line. This is incorrect, and I will take points off. Okay, so don't place an extension line on top of an object line. It's okay if you cross through an object line, but it's not okay if you overlap it, as shown here. Let me hit escape. Okay, so this is incorrect. Notice we don't have the gap here. We can see the gap there and the gap here. Okay, so let me go ahead and click on the dimension, and using the grip, I just need to push it over to the vertex, hit escape, and it automatically generates a gap. Okay, so that's it for these two. Now let's take a look at any other dimensions that we probably missed. Okay, so now we have the dimension of 2. Okay, so the bottom is our datum. There's more surface than the top, so more surface on the bottom. So we'll set this as our datum, and we're going to dimension bottom to the first step and then bottom to the next step. Okay, in this case, instead of having the 0.50 over here, it makes more sense to have the 0.50 inches on this side, because you can actually see the step. Here, even though we see the line representing that step, it's not really clear what's going on here. But here on the side view, you can see it's a step. Okay, almost like walking up the stairs. Okay, so it's preferred to put the 0.50 here, even though from our lecture notes, we learned that we should try and group dimensions together, right? It's like grouping the siblings together. You want to have the youngest inside and work your way up to the oldest. Have the oldest on the outside, protecting the younger dimensions. Okay, but in this case, it makes more sense to separate them. All right, so let's throw in this dimension of 2 inches. Okay, and we're going to use linear once again. Again, you can use the quick dimension option, but sometimes it may give you the wrong dimension. So I'm going to do it the long way. I'll go with linear. Pick the bottom right corner, top upper corner, and space it out, right? About 2 text heights away from the object line, and just eyeball it. Okay, so when you're dimensioning and also setting up your views, when it comes to spacing between your views or how you space out your dimensions, again, think of getting your first apartment or your first house. You're having a housewarming party. You want to set things out and space things out, I should say, when it comes to your furniture, right? You want the couch in the right location. You want your TV in the right location where it makes sense. So again, think of setting up a drawing, the way you place your dimensions and your views, just like setting up your furniture in your new home. Okay, you want to make an impression on your guests. All right, so we're done with the front view. So let's move over to the right side view. All right, so we got to add the 0.50, right, for this step height. And then for 1 inch and 2 inches, we need to pick a datum. Obviously, the right or the back side has more surface than the front. So we'll dimension right to left for these 2 dimensions. Okay, and again, look at the spacing. Okay, you don't want it to look too crowded. You want to space them out. And if you have to move a view over to give them more space, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so it's preferred that it doesn't look crowded. So it's a good idea in this case to move the right side view over to the right. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. All right, so let's go back. So let's dimension using linear. Okay, so we'll get the height and click. Notice it placed the 0.50 inside and the arrows on the outside. And the reason for that, it's because it may get crowded. Again, you don't want it to look crowded. Let's zoom in a little bit, roll the wheel. Okay, so one thing you don't want is for this to look too tight. So in this case, AutoCAD automatically set the arrows outside. We can always set the arrows back inside. So if I select the dimension, I can always hover over the grip and see just by hovering over the grip at the tip of the arrowhead, I can flip the arrow if I want. Same thing with the bottom one. I can hover over the blue grip and flip the arrow and hit escape to deselect, and see that looks, it just doesn't look right, right? So you don't want to place a piece of furniture in your home facing in the wrong direction or crowding itself. So, hey, we need to do something to make it look nice. So we can just click on the dimension. Now we see the blue grips, hover over them and flip the arrow and flip the arrow. Okay, other options you have is if you still think it looks too crowded, you can leave it the way it is, or if you have the option to actually take the text out. So I'm going to hover over the grip over the text and I can take it outward, as you can see. Let me see if I can move it over to the right a little bit or to the left. I'm going to stick to the left, right? Using the grips. Okay, and that's even acceptable also, right? So you could have gone in this direction and hit escape. Okay, so that looks clean. Okay, it's okay to move a dimension outward. I could have also gone upward, right? Okay, another option is to place the arrowheads inside. Okay, that's another option. I can flip the arrows. As long as it doesn't look crowded, that's acceptable also, okay? So either of the three is acceptable. Arrows inside, or text inside, or all three outside, okay? Either one looks presentable. Just don't place the text and the arrowheads inside the extension lines, because that'll look way too crowded. It'll look tacky, right? You don't want to make a bad impression. All right, so now let's move on to the other two dimensions. Okay, so linear dimension. So we're going to go from the back side over to the front. Okay, and it automatically took out the arrowheads. And let's go to the next one, linear. Go to the next point. And again, you want to space them out. You know what I should line it up with? The one on the front view. As you can see, I can just hover over and it's tracking the dimension on the front view, right? You can do that. Same thing with this one. We can move it upward and see if we can line it up with this one. I'm trying to track. It's not tracking very well. Oh, there it is. Got it. And hit escape. All right, so we're actually done with this problem. But before we exit and save our work, let me first go back to the Home tab. Let me turn off the construction layer. Okay, so we're actually done. But now let me show you how to space it out. So you can make the argument that this just looks too crowded. So I can window capture or window lasso, just like a cowboy or cowgirl. Go around with your lasso. And there it is. And we can just move it towards the right. I'm going to use the move command just to space it out. This is optional. You don't have to do this part. And again, you want to have ortho on. So it allows you to only move vertical or horizontal. Okay, so you have that option to move it over. It looks a lot cleaner. You don't want two couches or a couch and a table too close together. You want to leave some room for walking by. Okay, and hit escape to exit. All right, so another thing I wanted to bring up is decimals. Obviously, this is inches. One way you can tell a drawing, you know, whether, hey, is this inches? Is this millimeters? How can I tell? Well, you can tell by the small numbers, right? If it's millimeters, you would see 30 millimeters, 50 millimeters. Another way to distinguish from millimeters drawing is look at the number smaller than 1. So this is 0.50. So notice there's no 0 in front of the decimal. So this tells us this is inches. If this was 0.50 millimeters, if it's millimeters, you have to put the 0 in front. So that's another way to distinguish between millimeters and inches. No 0 in front of the decimal means it's inches. If you see a 0 in front of the decimal point, then it's millimeters. Right? Okay, so also when it comes to decimal places, if you don't have the experience or just don't know how many decimal places to go with, when working with inches, typically 2 decimal places is the way to go. I always dimension my drawings first with 2 decimal places. If I'm dimensioning a hole where there's a shaft going through, and we're going to cover shafts and clearance holes versus line or inline versus shafts that have almost the exact same diameter as a hole, where it's the perfect match. Those are referred to as inline. And we also have interference holes where the hole is just slightly smaller than the shaft. And actually you have to use a small hammer or a mallet to pound the pins inside the hole. And it's held by friction. But we're going to talk about hardware in a later chapter. So when dealing with holes where you want a diameter and control, tight fit diameter and control it, then you will go to 3 decimal places on the diameter of a hole. And maybe even up to 4 decimal places. But typically 2 decimal places is the way to start. And then you can work your way to 3, maybe 4 decimal places, depending on the function of the circular hole. Depending what type of fastener you're going to put, whether it's a bolt, a dowel pin, etc. All right, so if you wanted to change the decimal places, let's say you wanted to go up to 3 decimal places. Okay, let's say this had to meet a tight tolerance, which is more expensive if you go with 3 decimal places. But let's say you had to and you wanted to change all of them to 3 decimal places. We can go back to the Annotate tab, go to Dimensions panel, and click on this little arrow pointing downward. Okay, and this is covered in our lecture notes, right? So if you go back to our lecture notes for Chapter 8, I covered the Dimension Style Manager. Okay, so currently we only have one standard. So here you would be following an ANSI, American National Standards Institute standard, or an ISO, an international standard, or the ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And there's also the Japanese standards, JIS, I believe it is. So you're going to follow some standard. It can be a company standard. All right, so now we're going to modify the standard. We're going to modify it. Okay, so let's go through the first tab. So here's the first tab. This allows you to make some changes on how far or how much of a gap to use on the extension lines, how far to extend your extensions beyond the arrowheads. And this is all following a standard, so you can pretty much leave all these numbers alone. Okay. Symbols and arrows. Okay, so this controls the size of the arrowhead. So the arrowhead is pretty much the size of a text. So the length of the arrowhead is pretty similar to the height of the text, which is about 0.18 or 0.16. If you want to add a center line, when you add a radius, dimension, or diameter, it can insert a center mark, as you can see, and you can even extend it if you pick the line option. Okay, so we are in the Symbols and Arrows tab. Okay, so we'll be doing this later on in a separate problem that has a circle or an arc. Okay, and you can just say none, and it'll just put a little dot, which is part of this radius dimension. All right, so and it allows you to also change other things, which typically you just leave alone. Okay, so you want to follow a standard. All right, so if we go over to text, I want you to notice that the text height is 0.18. Okay, so text height 0.18. You can always change it here. If I was to change the size here, it'll make them smaller. Now, I don't want you to change the text height. In some drawings, your dimensions are just going to be too large with respect to your view. So if you want to change a text height, you want to go to the Fit tab. Okay, so Fit tab will give you access to overall scale. So right now the default is 1. If I wanted to change my dimensions, let's say they were just too large in size with respect to the view, you can always make them smaller. Okay, and by changing the overall scale, it'll change the text height, the arrowhead, and the gaps, and the extension beyond the arrowhead, all in one shot. Okay, so let's say I wanted to cut it in half. Okay, I'm going to go 0.5 and take a look at the preview. So instead of a scale, overall scale of 1, I can go 0.5 and hit OK. Then when I close it, it's all going to go down to half scale. And 3, 2, 1, don't blink. And notice how everything got smaller. The gaps got smaller. They're still there if you zoom in. Okay, so gaps got smaller, arrowheads got smaller, and the text. And also the extension line, the distance beyond the arrowhead, also changed. Okay, so we can change it back. But there are cases where you want to make them smaller or larger. Okay, in this case we were okay, so let's go back. So go to the dimensions panel, click on the little arrow pointing downward. Okay, so you can have multiple standards here or settings. So we only have one. I'm going to go ahead and modify it. And I'll bring the scale up back up to 1. Okay, so again, if you ever need to change the text height, don't go to the text tab, go to the fit tab, go to overall scale. So it'll change everything on the dimension, arrowheads, extensions, gaps, and text height all in one shot. Okay, so let's increase it back to 1. Okay, and don't blink, in 3, 2, 1, close, and everything goes back up, right? Proportionally, right? So we're good. All right, let's go back to dimensions. Again, we're still talking about decimal places. So let's go back to Dimension Style Manager and modify it. All right, so that's the fit tab. Let's go over to primary units. And again, this is covered in the lecture video. So if you're wondering where is all this coming from, go back to the chapter 8 dimensions lecture video. All right, so if you want to change the number of decimal places all in one shot, here we have precision, right? Precision, if you want to add a gazillion decimal places, right? You can see it on the preview. It will add them once I exit this window, right? So you can see in the preview. I'm gonna go ahead and leave them alone. I'm gonna go back to 2 decimal places. Keep an eye on the preview. There it is, back to 2 decimal places. All right, if you want to change it from decimal to scientific to architectural to fractional, go for it, but we're gonna stick to decimal places. Or the format, we're gonna follow decimals. All right, so let's move on to the next one, alternate units. So sometimes you have a drawing where you want to list both inches and millimeters or millimeters and inches. So you do have that option and it'll display them behind the dimension. So watch what happens in the preview when I say, hey, display alternate units. So a good example is when you want to show inches and millimeters. Click on it and notice it'll give you 1.02 inches or 25.90 millimeters. Okay, so it'll give you the millimeters inside the brackets or parentheses. Okay, so you do have that option. It's very rare, but once in a while you will display both. But typically you pick one and stick with it, whether it's inches and you do everything inches or millimeters and use only millimeters. So that depends on where you work at, who you work for. All right, so I'm going to turn that off. And then we have tolerance. Okay, so tolerance, we're going to talk about tolerance in a separate chapter. We'll dedicate actually 2 chapters to tolerance. That's how much wiggle room you're going to give the machinist on how much they can be off by. So if you go to a Home Depot or Lowe's and you need a 2x4 and you ask the person there that cuts the 2x4, right, operating the saw, hey, I need a 2x4 5 feet long. You have to give them some wiggle room how much they can be off by. So they'll probably say, hey, is it okay if I go 5 feet 1 inch? Obviously they have a nice ruler there that they can use to be more precise, but you want to give them a little bit of wiggle room. So they'll probably go, hey, is it okay if it's 5 1/4 or 5 feet 1/4 inch or just a 1/4 inch less than 5 feet. So there has to be something acceptable because there's no such thing as a perfect cut, right? Because there's no such thing as a perfect measuring tool. Only in a perfect world. All right, so let's go back. So I'm just gonna hit OK and exit out of this. All right, another thing you can do is you can change decimal places by 1 or 2 dimensions. So you can pick a dimension, more than one if you like. So let's say I wanted to pick these 2 and I wanted to change the number of decimal places. You select them and then you right click, go to precision, and you can increase the number of decimal places. Let's go a gazillion here, right? You can do that. Okay, so you can either pick one or more than one. Then you right click and go to precision. And again, if you're using inches, most likely you'll be using 2 decimal places. If you're using millimeters, depending on the size of the object, you'll probably go with whole numbers, maybe 1 decimal place. But if you need precision, then you can increase it. The more decimal places, the more expensive the part will get, because then the machinist has to go slow to get a more accurate cut. All right, so let's go back to 2 decimal places. All right, so don't forget to save your work. Okay, so go to File, Save As. And I'll use my initials or type in complete. All right, so that's the end of this video. See you in the next one.